Here's why I would pick the Civic hybrid hatchback over the Toyota Prius. Now, when it comes to power, the Prius and the Civic actually have pretty similar horsepower figures. The Prius has about 196 versus 200 in the Civic, but it's the way that the power is delivered that I like about the Honda system versus Toyota. For starters, you have these sort of emulated gear shifts, which I know sounds like a gimmick, but compared to having to listen to a CVT drone, it's just so much nicer to hear those fake shifts. But secondly, it's how the power is delivered to the ground. The Civic Hybrid has much wider tires than the Prius. In fact, they're about 20% wider, which is a pretty big deal when it comes to things like accelerating and handling. In fact, that's kind of the reason why the Civic Hybrid is so much quicker from 0 to 60 versus the Prius. The second advantage is that, unlike the Prius, this isn't that rare of a tire size. The Prius has some pretty unique tires. In fact, I checked my local Costco and there's pretty much only one tire option available for the Prius versus about a dozen for the Civic. Now, when you consider the fact that neither of these cars have spare tires, tire availability might be something worth considering. The next advantage I like with the Civic is its interior cabin space. Even though the Civic and Prius have pretty much identical specs when it comes to exterior dimensions, the Civic doesn't have that aggressive aerodynamic shape of the Prius that somewhat intrudes on the cabin to sort of maximize fuel efficiency. Inside the Civic, even though I've got this seat almost all the way back, I'm 6 feet tall, I've still got about 2 to 3 inches of legroom, which is not bad, and I do have a little bit of headroom, but not the most spacious. However, like most cars, if I do lean all the way back, my head does hit the top. However, overall, it's just a little more spacious than the Prius. Now, if your goal is maximum fuel efficiency, then the Prius is definitely the way to go. But for me, I'm happy to sacrifice a couple miles per gallon in order to have a better driving dynamic and a little more cabin space on the inside. Of course, though, it's going to be hard to beat something like the Camry if you want maximum fuel efficiency and cabin space, but for me, this is kind of the perfect sized car.